I'm sticking my neck out for you on this, said Kamal's brother. Do not let me down. Kamal's mother was wailing loudly in the next room. My son, she cried. My son is lost to the Al-Hawim. My son is lost. He's not lost, mother, said Kamal's brother loudly. He'll be fine.
We are three larval worms inside a tall man's ear. We watch him sit in his office and stare at a screen too bright for us to see. Click, click, tap, tap, but we're too cold to leave. We've grown up here in this wet cave. Our mother lovingly oviposited us here, and then spread her fluttery wings and flew home to Venus.
This story definitely disturbed me. It's a very short story, but you're playing with so many things in it that really get to the heart of Squick, I guess you could say. The loss of personhood, loss of our planet, things that are very much like part of the degradations of capitalism and the death of our environment, but just on a more personal level, just like losing who you are as well. It is written from a very unusual point of view, an inhuman point of view, you might say. So I really wanted to know a little more about how you got into that headspace to really write from this perspective.
The way I came upon writing this story is actually kind of funny. I had COVID and I had a terrible fever. And I think it was like the idea of like having a disease in you that's like that kind of led to the worms. And then choosing the viewpoint I chose, I think almost was like an arbitrary decision. I was thinking about how you see on like National Geographic the ants that get like fungus in them, and then they go to the tops of the trees and like try to get eaten by a bird to pass that fungus on to the next thing. So I had that bouncing around in my head. And then I also had just like the kind of eeriness of, the diseases and everything that's all around us and what could be inside us at any moment. And I think that kind of culminated into the strange story that it did. And it's different than anything I've written. I've also never written from like a plural point of view. So that was fun and challenging.
It was interesting because we since we're getting everything from their point of view. Obviously, they don't spend a whole lot of time explaining themselves because it's self-evident to them. But right. You get so much of this the alienness coming through in this. We're in a book about bugs, and bugs are probably like the most alien thing that you can think of that we interact with. I wasn't expecting in this to like see anything that was actually written from a bug's point of view, and that actually made this like, they are kind of like more sympathetic than the humans.
Yeah, so I feel like I really enjoyed reading your story. I had a great time reading it. I actually read it twice. I read it just before this again, so it'd be fresh in my mind. But when Michael first sent it out, I read it like that night, and I was like, this is going to be a great anthology. But I really noticed the theme of like sort of being the other in a situation. And I think that's something that seems to be like, that comes up frequently in horror, but I feel like it's done really uniquely in this case.
Well, in some ways, I guess I should say it is similar to how your story had its birth in a fever dream. My story had a birth in a very bad trip. So I had consumed too much of a marijuana edible, and was basically living in a world of bugs, and there were like in this overwhelming feelings of just like, alienation. Horror is so much about being alone and being othered from our fellow humans, and just being in this just not being able to connect. And so that's really what the story is. The main character, Kamal, is having to do a business deal with people who are completely, well, I shouldn't say people, but a business associate who is completely unknowable. And throughout the story, everything that happens, he has no way of understanding it.
Yeah, one other thing I thought was really striking was the idea that like you can't think of the I guess the main antagonist as the grub, even though like that's what Kamal is always thinking of him as. I feel like that's like there's some level of like existential terror there, because it's like you can't think a certain way, even though it's like what you know of and like how you've always thought of it, but you have to like think about not thinking, and then that makes you think about it. And then like I think that's kind of just a scary situation on its own. And that kind of like I feel like that ties into the what is horror question and like the bizarre element of horror that's in both our stories.
I don't think either of our stories are particularly scary, but I think they do present like, look, this is a world that is so different. You know, these are different in some ways very different from ours, but at the same time, you know, dealing with ideas and feelings that, you know, are universal.
Yeah, I think, you know, at its base, horror is just like fear, and everybody has different fears and different like worldview that they have. But I think there are some things that are universal, like you said, like the fear of that alienation, being divided from other humans, and the fear of like losing your sense of place and home. I think is something that the place and home part being in like both our stories in different ways, which is kind of cool.